This is going to be a video about my experiences with psychiatry, psychiatric drugs, and particularly psychiatric drug withdrawal. So I started seeing a psychiatrist about 2 years ago now. Basically prior to that, I'd seen a GP. I'd tried antidepressants to deal with really low moods that I was experiencing. I found they did nothing after a year. I tried seeing a psychologist for a while. She did some basic CBT techniques, but they weren't overly effective, so I really felt like I needed to turn to a psychiatrist to get help. So I started seeing one. He basically gave me a short survey, assessed it, and then asked me some questions like, do you ever feel like you're a bit impulsive, like you do things like drink a bit more than you intend to, or just impulsively buy things? Do you ever feel like you're really motivated, like there's no limit to what you can get through? And I was like, well, yeah, I guess, there's times when I feel like that, yeah, sure. And on that basis he went, oh, okay, well, I think you fit the definition of bipolar type 2, which is a bit absurd because I never experienced anything that resembles hypermania or mania or high moods. I'm probably one of the more humble and introverted people you'll ever meet, so it was really unfounded where he got that from, and it's since been overturned by almost every doctor I've talked to since seeing him. But anyway, at the time I just ran with it because I wanted out of the depressed moods I was in, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm bipolar. Maybe that's why antidepressants don't work. I need different drugs to treat this disease. So he started me on lithium. Then after about 6 months, he added valproate. And then after about a year and a half, I was going through a really painful breakup with my girlfriend. I was drinking a lot, but for fairly rational reasons to try and deal with that. But he saw that as a prolonged manic episode, my weekly going out on a Friday night and drinking a lot. So he prescribed me a major tranquilizer called Asenapine at 20 milligrams, which is the dose that's prescribed for schizophrenics or people with extreme mania. So God knows why, but that's what he decided I need to be put on. He never once, I have to say, he never once during this time period offered any psychological skills, techniques, methods for dealing with my emotions, for bettering my life. He never gave me any material, nothing. Every session he basically just asked me vague questions that encouraged me to just complain about anything that was wrong with my life, and then he just concluded the session by just prescribing me a new drug, or just upping the dose of the drug I was on. He had me at absurd doses of lithium and valproate, pretty much the maximum you can be on. And the Asenapine, I tried 20 milligrams. It felt like it would tranquilize an elephant, so I went down to 10 milligrams and I stayed on that because it did make everything feel like cloud nine. I just lived in bliss. It got rid of the heartache. I just sort of floated through life in this dazed state. And that continued for about 3 or 4 months, and then I started noticing these side effects. I noticed I had quite a bit of tremor in my hands. Suddenly I couldn't write very well, particularly if I was nervous, like in an exam, which I was in. It became almost impossible to write. I almost didn't finish the exam, almost just gave up and cried and left the exam room halfway through because I just thought there was no way I was going to be able to write, but I somehow managed to get through that exam and do okay in it. But yeah, just this constant fine tremor in my hands. The other thing I noticed was brain fog and a really faulty memory. I was forgetting names of everyone, names of work colleagues I've known for years. I was forgetting names of streets that I've been in hundreds of times before, addresses, phone numbers. Just nothing would stick in my brain. And I'm a university medalist. I made the dean's list in my studies. I pride myself on my intellect, and to suddenly have that robbed from me was really scary. So I approached my psychiatrist and I said, look, these drugs are doing more harm than good. I still don't really feel like they've helped my mood at all, and now I've got all these side effects. I want off them. So he agreed, and we first removed the valproate, and that was fine, nothing bad happened, but none of the side effects went away. So then we removed the lithium. Once again, nothing bad happened, but none of the side effects went away. Then we did a rapid taper off the Asenapine. It was a 25% reduction every 4 days. So I went from 10 milligrams to 0 over a total of 12 days, which is really fast. Basically, halfway through that taper, I got insomnia. Like, it just felt like my brain just forgot how to sleep. I just would not get a minute's rest at night. And I started to get quite anxious and agitated. Like, I just really didn't feel right. I felt like just pacing back and forth all the time. I felt like, I just couldn't sit still. I couldn't concentrate. Just everything was too hard. I was just, ugh. But I thought, you know what? I'm just going to push through this. I'm going to get off the drug. You know, this will probably only last a few weeks, and then I'll be fine. I can get on with my life. So I did. I pushed through. I got off the drug completely. And then about a week went by, and the anxiety just got worse and worse and worse and worse until it just reached this level, which is diabolical. I literally felt like I was going to die constantly. I would grab my head, I would scream. It just felt like an air raid siren was just constantly going off in my brain. It felt like, if you've ever seen the movie I Am Legend, where he tries to give the antidote to the lady who's tied down on the bed, and she just goes into spasms and starts just screaming and howling. That's pretty much what it was like. It was horrible. So my parents freaked out. They took me to hospital. The hospital just looked at my health record and said, "Oh, you see a psychiatrist. Oh, this is a mental health issue. We'll transfer you to the psychiatric ward." So there I went. They just dosed me up on high amounts of benzodiazepines for 5 days until I eventually saw a psychiatrist, and he refused to believe it had anything to do with withdrawal or from being on Asenapine, and said I had agitated depression and gave me an option of doxepin or Seroquel to take. So I chose doxepin, left the hospital, went home, took the doxepin for 2 weeks, nothing happened. The agitation just got worse, the anxiety just got worse. I started to get really, really panicky, and to be honest, I started to get quite suicidal. I was freaking out, I was just losing it altogether. My parents got really scared. They thought there was a good chance I might kill myself, so they took me back to the hospital again. Once again, same result. Just went to a psychiatric wing, sat there for 5 days on Valium. And at the end, the psychiatrist saw me, and this time he put me on mirtazapine, which is another antidepressant. I left the hospital. I went back and saw my psychiatrist. He said, "Oh no, you've got agitated depression. This is a new phase of your bipolar coming out. There's no way this is still related to the Asenapine withdrawal. It's been 5 weeks now. It's long out of your system. It can't be the Asenapine." So that was disheartening. So I let another 3 weeks go by, and the mirtazapine did jack shit. The anxiety just still kept racing. I was losing it. I seriously felt like I was going to die. It was the most horrendous thing. You can't comprehend it. You can't. It's so far beyond the normal scale of human emotion, what was going through my brain. It was just terrible. I felt like a crack addict or something who was just dying slowly each day. So I really started to panic. I really started to lose all hope. I thought my life was over. But I reached out on a forum called survivingantidepressants.org. I told my story, and one of the site administrators got back to me and gave me the information for a doctor in Brisbane who specialises in psychoactive drugs and also in psychological intervention, so things like relational frame theory, acceptance commitment therapy, basically teaching people psychological techniques to get over not get over, but to help them deal with their mental issues, as opposed to just mindlessly prescribing drugs to them, as every other psychiatrist I'd seen up until this point did. So he did that, but he also realised that he needed to stabilise me on some drugs to try and deal with the withdrawal that I'm going through. Sorry about that, it's just coming in the house. Yeah, so basically realised we're going to need something to stabilise me. So we started on Largactil, which is a really old antipsychotic. It's called chlorpromazine. Basically because it's low potency. It's really old, so it's come off patent, so it's dirt cheap. And it comes in a range of doses, so it's easy to taper because you can get it in, you know, hundreds, 25s, 10s, and they're big size tablets, so they're easy to cut up compared to things like Zyprexa and Seroquel, which are these tiny or easily dissolved tablets which are really hard to try and divide and taper effectively. So we started on 50 milligrams of that, and unfortunately I'd also developed a mild Valium addiction at this time. So I'd been on Valium for about a month at 2.5 milligrams twice a day, so we're having to slowly taper off the Valium as well. So I'm down to 1.25 milligrams once a day. So how are things? Well, they're still pretty bad. My anxiety during the first 8 weeks was a 10 out of 10. It was horrible. I felt like dying constantly. It now feels like a 7 or 8 out of 10. It still feels worse than anything I've experienced in my entire life. I still feel like from when I wake up to when I go to sleep, I'm just stuck in constant fight or flight mode. I can't really concentrate. I can only read small bits of information at a time. I can watch bits of TV. I can do a little bit of basic exercise each day, but that's about it. There's no way I could return to my job. There's no way I could study or really do anything. I'm still stuck in this really agitated state. All I can do is just hope that it slowly goes away. But there's not much else I can do. So what I've learned from this experience, think really, 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 really hard before ever taking a psychiatric drug for a mental problem. Exhaust every psychological option available to you. There's some really good ones now. So the model I'm using is called Acceptance Commitment Therapy. There's a really good book on it called The Happiness Trap by Dr. Russ Harris. Look into that. Find a good psychologist. It doesn't matter if you have to see 5 or 6 before you find one that you can connect with and that you feel has the right tools to help you. Really try to do everything to better your life, because these drugs, the antidepressants, the antipsychotics, the mood stabilizers, they aren't happy pills. They're not going to change your personality. They're not going to make you a better person. At best, they just create a sense of apathy. They just create a sense of carelessness, that you can just float through life without really giving a damn about anything. That's all they do at the best. And at the worst, they leave you with horrible, horrible side effects and terrible withdrawals if you try to come off them. But good luck trying to convince Big Pharma of that. As far as they're concerned, GPs should just hand these things out like candy, and everyone should be on antidepressants, and that's why most of these drugs are billion-dollar blockbusters, when really they should be reserved for only very serious, life-debilitating mental disorders. And the second thing is, psychiatrists know scarily little about these drugs and close to nothing about withdrawal. I once had my first psychiatrist give me the scientific, the detailed explanation for why antidepressants take 2 to 3 weeks to work, and it was the most basic, rudimentary description I've ever heard. He just said, it's not when the drugs hit the receptors, it's when the secondary messenger systems start working. That's when the drugs really start to pick up and work, when the secondary messengers start firing. And I'm like, that is so wrong, it's not funny. I'm a pharmacology major, and it's not even close. I can't believe that is actually your depth of knowledge as to how these drugs work. It's rather scary. And in relation to withdrawal, they seem to think it has to do with half-life. They seem to think it has to do with how long it takes for this drug to leave your system, which it's not. Withdrawal is due to the neurological changes that these drugs do to your brain. Your brain wants to maintain homeostasis, and when you introduce these drugs, they substantially change the environment. In the case of antipsychotics, they block receptors. They block most of your serotonergic receptors, your adrenergic receptors, your dopaminergic receptors, your histamine receptors, your muscarinic receptors. They antagonize them all. They block them all. So what does the brain do in response to this? It goes, well, I need to make more. I need to upregulate the number of receptors to try and get over this blockage that's happening. So it does. It makes an artificially large amount of receptors in your brain. It also sensitizes the receptors. It goes, well, for the little neurotransmitter that manages to bind to these receptors, I need that to cause a very powerful signaling cascade, so it increases the sensitivity of the signaling and of the receptor. So you end up with this very sensitive, very upregulated system in your brain. So what happens when the drug is then taken away, and the neurotransmitter can suddenly flood and actively bind to the receptor, is you get massive excitation occurring, massive overstimulation of almost every neurotransmitter pathway in your brain. It just goes into freaking chaos, and suddenly you're just super agitated. Your upregulated histamine receptors mean that you just can't sleep at all because your sleep cycle is destroyed. The dopamine and serotonin receptors are the reason why you're just in extreme agitation and anxiety constantly. You just go into chaos, and that's what happens when these drugs are rapidly removed. It has nothing to do with half-life, and I just wish they would actually teach this to doctors at some point during their training, because these changes that the brain makes, it makes them over an extended period of time, months, and for whatever reason, it then takes an even longer period of time for your brain to stabilize and to revert those changes and to come back to a normal physiological state. It just seems to take a very long time. Months, if you've been taking the drug a long time, it's not uncommon. There's a lot of posts out there from people saying they still don't feel the same a year or even 2 years later, which is really scary, and I really hope it's just not the case with me, because I'm just devastated at the thought that I might lose years of my life just trapped in an agitated and anxious state. So my advice, if you're going through withdrawal, or you're thinking about coming off your drug because it's probably not doing anything, or it's doing more harm than good, then this isn't actual advice. Please still consult a doctor to some degree. Please still try and get someone on your side. Don't just do this on your own, because it can get really ugly, and I don't want to take the blame for if bad things happen in that circumstance. But some general advice, if it's possible, swap to a less potent drug with a longer half-life, so that you can take a larger milligram amount, which means it'll be easier to taper. Because you won't have to chop the drug up into tiny little incy-wincy bits and take them. If you're able to taper down from 100 to 0, as opposed to trying to taper down from 10 to 0, you can make the process a bit easier. And the longer half-life will mean you don't get interdose withdrawals, which can occur, especially with the benzodiazepines. So it's very common for if people are on clonazepam or Xanax or something like that, that they'll swap across to Valium or diazepam. And how to taper, the rule is the 10% taper. And that basically means, in order for you to remove the drug at a slow enough rate that your body can keep up with the changes it needs to make to revert back to normal, lower the dose of the drug by no more than 10% every 3 weeks. So if you're on 50 milligrams, this would mean going down to 45. At the end of 3 weeks, only if you feel stable, only if you're not experiencing anxiety, insomnia, gastrointestinal problems, apathy, suicidal thoughts, as long as none of that sort of stuff has arisen, you can then reduce it by a further 5 milligrams in that example. However, if you're not, don't reduce the dose. Wait. It's not uncommon for people to need up to 6 weeks between dose reductions. So be willing to wait out that time period if necessary. Also, some people will find that at a certain point, the initial 10% dose reduction is too big. Reducing by that amount just causes too severe withdrawal effects. So you need to start then, if you reach that point, you need to start reducing by what's the current dose you're taking. So if I was on 50 and I went down, taper down to 25 milligram, in that 25 milligram I found like a further 5 milligram drop was just too big, I would taper from 10% of my current dose. So for 25, that would mean reducing it by 2.5 milligrams. So I would go down to 22.5 milligram. and then I would reduce it from 10% of 22.5 milligrams. So you reduce by smaller and smaller increments as you get lower and lower and lower. And ideally, you really want to taper all the way down to about 1 milligram or less before you start to consider jumping off the drug. So during this withdrawal process, what to avoid? Obviously any stimulants and alcohol. So avoid caffeine, chocolate, lollies, MSG, bacon, anything that's activating. So you want to avoid St. John's wort. D vitamins are activating, so avoid those. So this also rules out most multivitamins. And if you're going through antidepressant withdrawal, don't use serotonin enhancing supplements, because they will just artificially boost your serotonin levels, and that'll prevent your brain from making the changes that it needs to in order to return to a normal physiological state. And as soon as you stop taking that serotonin supplement, you'll probably fall into withdrawal. So don't take those if you're going through that. What to take? There's a lot of things out there. I know it's really easy to get desperate and to start searching for anything that might make life just a little bit easier. Like I was looking at things like hydrolyzed casein, N-acetylcysteine, naturopath concoctions. I got some of those made up. I was looking at valeria root, passion flower, melatonin, all sorts of things, and really none of them help. They really don't do a thing. The only supplements which will help a tiny bit, the only supplements that will maybe reduce the severity of your withdrawal reaction by maybe 1 or 2%, and that will help to promote the healing process, are fish oil or krill or calamari oil, whichever one you want to take. Try to get like 500 to 800 milligram of DHA a day of that. You'll then want to take vitamin E, because if you're taking a high amount of fish oil, then it depletes your body of vitamin E as an antioxidant, so you want to take a vitamin E supplement. Magnesium powder that you can mix in with water. Just make sure it's pure magnesium, make sure it doesn't have D vitamins or any activating things like ginseng or something mixed in with it. And vitamin C powder. And once again, make sure it's just pure vitamin C, just make sure it doesn't have other things mixed in with it that you're taking. The other thing is what to do if you're going through really bad withdrawals, if you're almost paralyzed and bedridden. I know it's really hard. I know how almost impossible it becomes to do anything, to hold down any food, to lift your head up off your bed. It's really hard. I can really sympathize with how really freaking bad it can get. But it will help if you can just find a way to put some structure in your day. The human mind evolved to achieve goals, to follow a routine, to have some sort of structure and meaning in its life. If you just live in limbo, lying in your bed all day long, just thinking over, is this ever going to get any better? Am I ever going to recover? Am I permanently broken? What have these drugs done? Why did I ever start seeing a psychiatrist? Oh my God, I just want to die. You're just going to end up in a worse place than where you're already at. So try and put some structure in your day. A basic routine that was advised to me by a really good nurse, actually, whilst I was in the hospital, was 2 showers, so 1 in the morning, 1 at night. No matter how bad you feel, a nice warm shower will help. It'll make you feel just that little bit better. Try and do something that's going to distract your brain. Something that's going to engage it and that's going to prevent it from just looping around on thoughts about how bad the situation you're in is. So for me, it was just really easy Sudoku puzzles, and often I didn't have enough energy to do them all at once. So I would just attempt it for like 10 or 15 minutes and then put it aside and go lie down for a while, and then I'd try and attempt a bit more of it. And also really simple iPad games. I played one called Spell Tower, which is just really easy. It's just trying to make words out of letters. And that'll just distract you, and it'll just put some structure in your life. And if you're feeling a bit better, a bit less severe in your withdrawals, then some exercise is good. I just went for walks around my block, which is just under 1 kilometre, And just walking, just doing some exercise will make things better. It will, getting a bit of sunlight, getting a bit of oxygen through you, no matter how bad you feel, even if you're just dragging your feet each step and you just feel like you're going to die, I guarantee by the end of that walk, you'll feel just that bit better than you did before. So there are just some basic things that are really good to do, just to add a bit of structure to your day so that you're not just lying on the couch every day just thinking about how horrible your life is. My other advice is how to use the internet. By all means, use forums like survivingantidepressants.org to get some advice, to get some support when you need it, to maybe help you find a doctor in your local area who's going to be more knowledgeable and more on your side in terms of what you're going through. But don't use it to read other people's horror stories. Nothing will make you feel more depressed or more panicky about your situation than if you start reading about someone else who's withdrawing off the same drug as you, but it's been 6 months or a year and they still feel terrible and they're still in very protracted withdrawals. If you just start reading through all that, you're just going to feel horrible. And you also just don't know. You don't know really probably how long they took the drug for, what other drugs they've taken, what other drugs they're taking, what their lifestyle was like before they ever went on the drug, what their genetics are like, what their physiology is like, their age, their gender. There's just so many factors which will have a really big impact on how the drug affects you, how long your withdrawal is, and how severe it is. So there's just nothing to gain really from reading other people's horror stories. And that's all you're going to find on the internet. You're not going to find stories about people who had, you know, a 2-month withdrawal that was slightly painful and then they're fine. Those people don't go on the internet and write big long stories. And, you know, it's only the people who suffer really bad, like me and like a number of others who write their stories on the internet and try to get some advice. But you know, maybe when you're a bit better, you can read through them and you can try and help and support those people. But when it's really bad, when you're really, really in severe protracted withdrawals, it's just best not to read that stuff. My last point is, whilst withdrawal is 90% physiological, there's still that 10% psychological element. There's still that mindset you can develop that'll help you get through it easier than just lying in bed all day, just going, oh my god, I'm going to die, my life's over, I'm going to lose everything. There's some really good techniques out there. I strongly invest with investing some time in learning mindfulness meditation and learning some of the associated techniques, things like diffusion from thoughts, expansion and acceptance of feelings, relational frame theory concepts. If you can learn stuff like that, it's not going to make it any easier, but it's just going to change things slightly. It's going to probably just prevent you from slipping into suicide to just keeping treading water, just keeping your head above water so that you can just keep going. And that can just be a really big difference. I think it's really worth investing some time in learning some good psychological techniques whilst you're going through this. Yeah. So that's all I've got to say. If I get some interesting questions, I might post a follow-up video. Otherwise, I might post one in about a month's time, just telling you how I'm going and how the withdrawal's continuing. But otherwise, that's about it. So, thanks.